If you're looking for the ultimate easy mode sorcerer build for solo and group content in the Elder Scrolls Online, then this is the video for you. Hey everybody, HEM here, ready to update my favorite build of all time, the Unkillable Magicka Sorcerer Infinity build. This one can do it all. Incredible damage, insane self-healing and survivability, a super easy rotation that only requires a few skills and 0 bar swapping. There's also no trials gear necessary on this build, so anybody can pick it up right away, and I can't wait to show you how to make it all work, so let's jump right into it. Alright everybody, here we are back on the Magicka Sorcerer. Time to update our 1-bar Infinity build for the Elder Scrolls Online. Let's go ahead and jump into the buff stats here. Let me just use my potion, because that's actually all we need. Super simple. Here we go. So, tons of max stats you can see. 36k max magicka, 26, almost 27k max health, 20k max stamina. Very good recoveries. We have more health recovery than anything. That's because we're focused on heavy attack, so you don't need much magicka recovery. No worries there. Lots of weapon and spell damage, almost 50% crit chance, which is very good. Penetration does go up with some of our skills. And look at those resistances. Almost 30k spell resistance, about 25, 26k physical resistance. So overall, very good stats. Of course, you will want 64 points into Magicka, this being the Magicka-focused sorcerer setup. Mundus Stone, we will be using the Thief Mundus just to max out that critical chance as high as possible. Now, in terms of the buff food, like I said, you don't need much recovery on this build. The more health recovery actually you have, the better. That's actually buffed by some of our sorcerer passives. So this one, Bewitched Sugar Skulls, gives us tons of max stats. Almost 4,000 health, stamina, and magicka, so this one I do recommend. But basically any tri-stat food, would be fine on this build. Got tons of other buffs, obviously we'll talk about where those come from in just a few minutes. Now, other consumables, I am using an armor potion to get my armor as high as possible. That's called Essence of Health, and this is actually amazing for 1-bar builds, since you should have most of your, offensive buffs already. If you're doing the heavy attack build, you really don't need any recovery. This only buffs your survivability, which is awesome, especially for soloing, tougher things like world bosses, Infinite Archive, and so on. The armor that you get from this actually stacks with your armor buff, either from Oaken Soul or your class buff, so it's really great, like I said, for solo content. If you need to see the recipe for that one, check out the written guide. I'll have a link for that down below to help you get started there. And in terms of race, I went with Khajiit for this particular build. I like how it's giving me recovery. I like the max stats. And I do obviously like the critical damage and critical healing. I think that's great for solo content. Any offensive race, honestly, is going to be totally fine. So things like High Elf, Dark Elf, even Orc, where you get that bonus weapon and spell damage from your racial passives. That'll be another really nice option for this build. But that covers the basics, so let's go ahead and jump into the gear sets next. And I made a few changes here because this build is just so powerful. Sorcerer in particular has gotten tons of upgrades to their skills, which means we can actually change a few things in terms of gear sets. So first let's talk about the main offensive set, which has not changed. That is the Sergeant's Mail set. This is pretty much your go-to heavy attack set in ESO. Gives you the highest bonus to heavy attacks in the game right now. 645 bonus damage per stack, up to 4 stacks total. So you're getting, 2,400, 2,500 extra damage on all of your heavy attacks, and that does scale up with all of your other offensive bonuses as well. And the only thing that's tricky about this is that stacking mechanic, so you want to make sure basically to keep that maintained that you're heavy attacking all the time. And when you do cast your abilities, you want to follow them up immediately with a heavy attack. If you do that, you can see you can pretty much maintain the 4 stack bonus all the time. That's what we want to do. Now, how do we set that up? Well, generally the best way is to use a weapon, so that's going to give you 2 set piece bonuses right away. And then since this is a heavy armor set, you want to do the heavy armor chest. That's going to be your 3rd set piece bonus. And then you're going to want to run 2 pieces of jewelry. Typically, I'm going to do 1 necklace and 1 ring. Those, by the way, I'm using the spell damage enchant, and I did transmute those to Bloodthirsty. This, because it is a heavy armor set, like I said, it comes with a healthy enchant by default, which gives you more max health. Not necessarily a bad thing for a sorcerer, especially if you want to play solo, but if you do want more damage, definitely transmute these to Bloodthirsty whenever you get a chance. So that is our main offensive set. Now, like I said, I am actually running 2 offensive sets this patch on the 1-bar sorcerer because our survivability is just so high. So in that case, I've switched over to Noble Duelist. This is another base game set, so it is pretty easy to pick up. And this is another heavy attack set. It's just a little bit less damage, actually, than the Sergeant's Mail set. You can see it gives us about 2,100 bonus heavy attack damage, and this does scale up with all of our other effects, champion points, and everything else. So as long as we're dealing a light or heavy attack in melee range, we will get that proc up. It's a nice 15-second proc, so it lasts a good long duration. And I think for solo content, it is very easy to maintain because chances are, an enemy is going to run up and try to hit you in the face. And so you're going to be in melee range pretty much no matter what. So this is a light armor set. Like I said, it's fairly easy to pick up. And you can just run 5 pieces of this one on the body. So I've got the Noble Duelist shoes, the legs, the hands, waist, and the shoulders. I've got those all divines, Max Magicka as the enchant. That's going to be our second 5-piece set. Obviously, we're not running a full monster set, so what I decided to go with here is a medium slime craw helmet. Make sure you put Max Magicka on this as well, and this just gives us a nice extra critical chance bonus that's going to be really helpful. And then finally, since we are doing the 1-bar setup, Oaken Soul Ring is really the best mythic that you can use for this particular build. It gives you tons of extra buffs, which we saw on the stat sheet. Most important probably is the Empower buff. That's a huge buff to your overall heavy attack damage, but you get all your other damage and survivability buffs as well. So this is really, really nice. I'll have a link down below for the written guide. If you don't have this yet and you like this playstyle, you definitely need to pick this up. Bloodthirsty on that one, spell damage enchant as well. So that's the overall setup. Like I said, I felt like the Sorcerer was so strong this patch in terms of survival. You'll see in the skills where we're getting all the extra healing from. So I don't really feel like we need a survivability set, but you can use something like the Alessian Order set, which I've run in previous versions of this build. That gives you a ton of survivability, lots of health recovery. That makes it really easy to survive. And I was even playing around with the new Sorcerer class set. This one is called Beacon of Oblivion. This is a decent offensive set as well. It gives you a bonus 15% damage done and 15% healing done as long as you're not using a pet. I'm not going to be using a pet on this version of the build, so it is another decent option you can check out as well. And speaking of which, if you want to see all the different armor sets that I recommend, different setups, again, you can check out the written guide down in the description or the pinned comment. I'll have everything listed there. But let's jump into the skills next. Pretty similar setup, though I am using one additional scribing skill, and I'll show you where that goes in just a second. But starting with our first healing and damage ability, Structured Entropy. It's a huge damage over time. This comes from the Mages Guild skill line. And this is great because it gives you that dot and, of course, that heal every 2 seconds. The nice thing about this that you may not know is you can cast it on multiple targets, and so you can get multiple heals stacked up. This is really good for fights where you might have 3 to 4 adds coming in at different times. Just hit them all with this, and boom, you got a ton of healing over time with a nice long duration. You even get some bonus Max Magicka from the Mages Guild passive. So yeah, this is a really good one, no-brainer skill, I think, on the Magicka Sorcerer. Now, next skill is Flexible, and I'm using a scribing skill here, and I'll show you why. So Wield Soul is what this skill is called. It's from the Soul Magic skill line, first skill that you get unlocked with scribing, and there's tons of different ways you can set this up. Obviously, that's the whole point of scribing, but I do like that we can apply some different shock effects to this. It's a single target damage skill, by the way. And so for damage, I've just applied shock damage. I think it makes sense with the Sorcerer class. Second script is going to be the class effect. So this one splits 2 ways. It has an effect for if you have a pet active, and if you don't. If you don't have a pet, you deal bonus shock damage to enemies within 8 meters of you, so it becomes sort of an AoE effect. Really nice, again, on the Sorcerer, obviously. And since it is a single target effect primarily, I can apply a major debuff to this skill as well, so I've chosen Major Breach. Now, Sorcerers don't have any class source of Major Breach in their kit, and so I think this is a nice way to get that in there. This is going to be super helpful for single target fights, especially if you're going into, dungeons where enemy resistances are quite a bit higher than overland content. You actually do want Major Breach in your toolkit somewhere. So this is a really nice way to get that. Plus, with that bonus shock damage on the Sorcerer, it's actually increasing our DPS quite a bit. So I do like this setup. Now, if you don't have scribing, that's completely fine because there's other skills you can get in ESO that give you that same Major Breach debuff, right? One of the easiest ones is going to be in the Destruction Staff skill line, and you're going to come down to weakness to elements and make it elemental susceptibility. This is very strong as well. In fact, This might even be stronger in places like Infinite Archive, where you have some bonuses to status effect damage, because this applies Burning, Shield, and Concussion. Along with the same Major Breach debuff, it's actually free to cast, and it has a 30-second duration. So this is a nice alternative way to do that, by the way. And the other skill I would recommend if you're doing, let's say, a lot of grinding, or you're fighting a lot of enemies all at once, there's actually another skill that has AoE Major Breach that comes from the Assault skill line, and you're going to take Caltrops morph to Razor Caltrops. This is the same Major Breach debuff, but it applies it to all enemies in a radius. It's an AoE effect. So that is really strong as well. So no matter what, I would take some skill there with Major Breach. That's what I would recommend for you. Now, next up is our defensive skill, and this is what I was talking about when I said that sorcerers are so strong now, especially for solo content in ESO, due to how this skill has been updated recently. So first of all, look at the ridiculous tooltip on this. I mean, 19k damage shield is pretty much the highest you're going to get in the game. I'm going to show you in a minute how I'm actually increasing that higher than it is normally. But the bonus effect that was recently added as well is the extra heal. So you can see if you have no pets affected, so basically, no summons out, you're going to get an extra heal, a 6k heal. Now, with our crit chance as high as it is, with our crit damage as high as it is, this is typically more like 10k, 10 to 12k plus on a crit heal. So it is essentially a burst heal that's tied to your main defensive skill. Anytime you have a shield, if you are missing health, it's going to be topped off pretty much instantly. So when I say you don't really need like a second defensive set on the sorcerer, this is the reason why. If you're running this skill, you are good to go in terms of survivability, at least from what I've found for most content. So yeah, you definitely want to be running this on your Magsork. It's incredibly powerful. Next up, we've got Unstable Wall of Storms. This comes from the Destruction Staff skill line. This is our second ability. And we're using this for the AoE damage, but also to proc our glyph. I am running a shock glyph. I think I forgot to show that on the weapon. Your Sergeant's Mail staff should be precise. You do want a shock glyph, and that's because combined with the unstable wall of elements, you're going to be able to set enemies off balance. Why is off balance good? Well, it's a huge debuff in terms of heavy attack damage. Basically, once a target is off balance, hit them with a heavy attack, they're going to take a ton of damage from that heavy attack, and it's a really nice way to burst down enemies and bosses. So yep, definitely recommend that one. And then our last normal ability, Bound Aegis. This comes from the Daedric Summoning skill line as well. And this is really just a passive ability. It gives you 8% max Magicka, gives you minor resolve, so extra armor, minor protection. We already have that from Oaken Soul. But yeah, it's a good defensive and offensive buff due to that extra max Magicka. Now finally, in terms of the ultimate here, you do have some options. Now, you might be tempted to run the Storm Atronach, but I'm going to say do not run this due to passives. So this is part of those changes that sorcerers got recently. Specifically, it's down here, Expert Summoner. So if you have a pet active, you get 10% max health. If you don't have a pet active, you get 10% max Magicka and stamina. Now, our health is already incredibly high for a solo or DPS build. On this setup, you don't need 10% more max health. It's just pretty much useless. You want the extra max Magicka and even max stamina if you're running something like Caltrops. So to keep that active at all time, don't run the Atronach. But other than that, the ultimate that I will use on some fights, depending on the ads, is going to be Shooting Star from the Mages Guild skill line. Why Shooting Star versus Elemental Rage? Well, Shooting Star won't do quite as much damage, since Thunderous Rage has a very long duration. But Shooting Star does give you ultimate back for every enemy you hit, and it does stun enemies as well if they can be stunned. So as long as they're not an elite mob or a boss, you're going to stun them also. So this is really helpful for clearing your way through dungeons, through different ad packs. That little bit of extra stun does help a lot in terms of survival, so enemies can't hit you while they're stunned, obviously, and you can just nuke them down with your ultimate combined with your heavy attack. So yeah, if you do have Mages Guild maxed out, I would recommend you pick this up. And then based on the fight, as I said, if you have more enemies to knock down, use Shooting Star. If it's just a single target boss fight, use Thunderous Rage instead. But that is the basic setup. So let me show you just how easy this rotation really is. Basically, in terms of buffs and debuffs, obviously maintain your shield, maintain that structured entropy for the little extra heal over time, and then you're just heavy attacking and alternating your skills in between. So heavy attack Wall of Elements, heavy attack Wield Soul, heavy attack Shield, keeping those up all the time. And if you have nothing else that needs to be maintained, you can use that Wield Soul ability to do some extra shock damage in between heavy attacks. So here we go. I'm going to start with my shield, apply Structured Entropy into a heal. I'll do Wield Soul there to debuff. I'll do my wall to set off balance, and then another heavy attack. You always want to be heavy attacking when the boss is off balance to maximize that damage. Just throwing in Wield Soul in between and then maintaining my wall. Here my shield came off, so heavy attack shield. Structured Entropy is down, so heavy attack Structured Entropy. Wield Soul again. Shield again, and you can see even though my health was low, came back right back up with that shield. Go ahead and use your ultimate if you have it. And you can see I'm healing even in between shields thanks to that Structured Entropy. And one other thing actually I'm doing in champion points, which I'll show you in just a minute. So yeah, you can see this boss is already dead. That was super easy. All right, so how does that work in terms of champion points? Well, in the green tree, nothing really new here. This is sort of the standard setup that I use. I'm going to start with Steed's Blessing for the extra movement speed. Combine that with Treasure Hunter, Rationer, and Liquid Efficiency. In the blue tree, we do mix things up a little bit, and I would actually recommend that you start here in Extended Might. Then at the bottom is a slotted star called Weapons Expert, and this gives you up to 20% bonus damage done with heavy attacks. So this is such a huge difference just for slotting one CP star. Definitely pick that one up first if you can. Then I was experimenting with some of the other ones. What I would definitely recommend though, Master at Arms for the extra burst damage. That's going to affect the last hit of your heavy attack, plus Wield Soul if you're using that to make that even stronger. Deadly Aim for those abilities as well. And then for that extra healing that I was talking about in between shields, you can use something like Reaving Blows, and this will actually proc off of Wield Soul. It'll proc off, again, that last hit of your heavy attack with the Lightning Staff. You'll get 8% of the damage that you do back as a heal. So with as big as the heavy attacks get on this build, you can get anywhere from 2k, 3k, up to I've seen 5k heals just from the last tick of the heavy attack when Reaving Blows is slotted. So that's something definitely to consider. You want to just make this super easy mode so you don't have to think about the healing as much, and you can be a little bit more offensive, not worrying to heal quite as often. One more thing here, by the way, make sure you pick up in Staving Death your defensive stars, especially down here, Preparation, that's 10% damage reduction. Very good if you're playing solo. Now finally in the red tree, I've got most of the typical things you would expect here. Rejuvenation, extra recovery is good. Fortified for the extra armor. Boundless Vitality for the extra health. We do want extra health whenever we can get it. But then the fourth star, I talked about increasing that shield size. Bastion does give you a 15% effectiveness to damage shields. So yeah, I would recommend that one for your fourth star on this build. Last but not least, if you're curious about the outfit style, this is actually a costume, I believe. Yeah, this is just the Grim Harvester costume. Hey everybody, if you're struggling at all with the Elder Scrolls Online, I definitely know the feeling. I struggled myself with this game for months. And the biggest problem I had was that even though ESO says you can play any way you want, it never really teaches you how. Like what skill lines to focus on, which passives are best, or which one of the 400 plus gear sets in the game are worth getting. Now, like I said, it actually took me months of teaching myself how the game works and hundreds of hours of experimenting before I could actually start to make builds that were effective and fun to play. But that's why I finally put my system for creating builds into a simple step-by-step guide that you can now use to create your own fun and powerful builds yourself. We're calling this the ESO Zero to Hero Academy, and it's being hosted through Podia, which is an amazing online learning platform. So far, our ultimate build guide has over 25 lessons and over 2 hours of content designed to take you from a beginner to a master build crafter, not in months like it took me, but in just a few hours. So if you want to check out the guide and preview all of the included lessons, check out the link below to get started. As always, thanks again for watching, and I will see you around in the next video.